Hey, and welcome back to Taboo Talk with Sarah, the podcast that breaks the silence, fosters hope, and talks about the tough stuff so you never feel alone. If you're new here, I'm your host, Sarah Jordan Ross. I'm a wife, a mum, a long-time wellness practitioner, and a storyteller. I come to this work shaped by lived experience, chronic illness, caregiving, faith, grief, healing, and by a deep commitment to staying human in a complicated world. Taboo Talk exists because too many stories go unheard and too many people carry heavy things alone. Here we tell the truth, gently, honestly, and without turning on one another. As we begin season 2, I want to take a moment to name where we are, not just as a podcast, but as people living in the world right now. Because this season doesn't exist in a vacuum. Across season 1, on this podcast, on panels I was on, at summits, and in every community space I was part of, one truth surfaced again and again. Whether we were talking about chronic illness, caregiving, leadership, trauma, faith, healing, or resilience, it didn't matter. It always came back to the same thing. We all want to belong, and love needs to be the loudest voice in the room. That truth matters, especially now. Part of the reason for this shift in the season comes from my own response to what happened at Bondi before Christmas. For Australians, events like that land differently. They carry a "this doesn't happen here, how is that possible" kind of weight. I remember every incident of mass violence in Australia during my lifetime, not because there've been so many, because there've been so few. Hoddle Street, Milperra, Strathfield, Port Arthur, and now Bondi. They stand out in our collective memory precisely because they're not normal here. After Port Arthur, Australia made a deliberate choice in response to what had happened. Our country introduced gun law reforms, and at the time, there was a clear collective message: not again. This doesn't ever happen again. For decades, mass violence on that scale, we didn't see it. Which is why when something like Bondi happens, it doesn't just shock us, it feels like a rupture. A reminder of what we once faced, and a warning of what we never want to normalize again. What stayed with me wasn't only the horror, it was the response. The people who ran towards danger, the people who protected strangers, the people who acted not because they were heroes, but because they were human. That moment sharpened something for me. If we don't learn the lessons of our past, if we forget what happens when fear turns into dehumanization, when identity hardens into ideology, we run the risk of repeating it. History shows us again and again that when human beings are divided into us and them, when entire groups are stripped of their humanity, unimaginable harm becomes possible. That's why this season, it's shifting focus. This season, I want to hold onto what draws us together. That's my focus. Not by ignoring what's wrong, but by paying close attention to how people respond when they notice it. I want to focus on the good because there is so very much of it in our world. It's just sometimes we have to look a little harder to find it and to see it. This season, I want to tell the stories of people who saw something that wasn't right and chose not to look away. People who acted, people who stayed human, people who became bridges instead of battlegrounds. Stories of people who were told, "You can't do that," and did it anyway. Stories of people who were knocked down by life, but got back up and didn't become bitter, closed, or cruel. You'll hear stories of courage from our past and our present. People who remind us what's possible when conscience leads, when compassion is chosen, and when love is allowed to be louder than fear. Some of these stories will come through conversations with guests, and some I'll share in solo episodes. Stories of people I admire, people whose lives quietly teach us how to resist dehumanization and choose connection instead. Because courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like persistence. Sometimes it looks like compassion under pressure. Sometimes it looks like staying open in a world that rewards shutting down. Season 1 of Taboo Talk with Sarah was about breaking the silence, about naming the things we don't talk about so people don't feel so alone. Season 2 is about what we do once we've noticed, once we've started talking. This isn't about outrage. It's not about pretending everything is fine. And it's not about staying quiet to keep the peace. It's about peacemaking, meeting pain with presence, fear with steadiness, division with bridge building. Because violence doesn't heal violence. Hate doesn't undo hate. And shouting past one another has never, ever made us safer. Connection does. Community does. Human beings to stay human. Making that choice, especially when it would be easier not to. That's what makes a difference. That's what keeps us safe. I'm raising children in this world, and I don't want to hand them a legacy of numbness, fear, or permanent division. I want them to inherit a world where people notice and choose care, where difference doesn't require dehumanization, where speaking up doesn't mean becoming harsh or cruel. So this season, before every conversation, I'll be asking a different kind of question. Not at the end, like last season where I asked, what's the conversation we need to have? But at the beginning, because orientation matters. Because noticing comes before action. And because everything changes when we stop pretending we don't see what's right in front of us. This is Taboo Talk. We talk about the tough stuff so you never feel alone. And this season, we're choosing connection over division, courage over silence, and humanity over fear. Together. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of these conversations. I'm Sarah Jordan Ross, and this has been Taboo Talk. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, your story matters, so please share it, because you never know when it's your story that will be the difference in someone else's life.